A $13.3 billion supercarrier is designed to withstand nuclear attacks, but there is one scenario in which this fortress is not allowed to fight and cannot retreat, because against a Category 5 hurricane, 5,000 sailors and advanced technology mean absolutely nothing. Against the power of nature, humanity is still just learning to survive. This is no longer a tactical problem. This is when the ocean itself tests a superpower by its most basic laws of nature. And to understand why a 100,000-ton vessel almost breaks itself, we must go deep into the mechanics of the monster wave. On the blueprints, the ocean looks like a manageable variable. Inside a Category 5 typhoon, the ocean is a kill box. When you've got winds screaming at 150 miles per hour, you aren't just looking at bad weather. You're looking at waves crashing into each other. But they don't just cross. They steal energy from one another. That's what a rogue wave is. A 50-foot wall of water that appears out of nowhere. It is like 5 normal waves suddenly merging into one giant monster. How could a simple wall of water defeat the best engineering brains on the planet? When a 100,000-ton supercarrier slams into a wave like that, it's not just a splash. It's a brutal stress test. The ship gets locked in a vice grip called hogging and sagging. Think of the ship as a flexible plastic ruler. When a wave crest lifts the exact middle of the ship, the front and back are left hanging in midair. The ship bends upward like a bow. That's hogging. Hogging, bow bend. The flight deck gets pulled tight like a guitar string, and the bottom steel gets crushed. Then, seconds later, the wave moves. The ship drops into the empty space between waves. Now the front and back are pushed up by 2 new waves, leaving the heavy middle hanging over nothing. That's sagging. The ocean isn't trying to sink the ship. It's trying to snap a $13 billion piece of steel in half, using the ship's own weight against it. You might think the fix is just to make the steel thicker and harder. But engineers know rigidity is a death sentence. If the hull is too stiff, it doesn't bend, it shatters. That specialized steel is made to flex. The ship survives because it behaves less like a rigid warship and more like a massive floating suspension bridge, bending just enough to stay alive. But surviving the wave is just the external battle. The real nightmare? It's hiding deep inside the engine room. People assume a carrier sinks because water rips a giant hole in the hull. But inside a typhoon, the ship rarely dies from flooding, it dies from suffocation. Deep inside the belly of the USS Gerald R. Ford, 2 A-1B nuclear reactors are driving the ship. The nuclear fission doesn't need oxygen, but the brains of the ship do. To feed its massive electrical grid, the carrier relies on giant ventilation shafts high above the water. But inside a Category 5 hurricane, the air isn't just air anymore. It's 150-mile-per-hour winds whipping the tops off the waves, turning the atmosphere into a thick, blinding fog of deadly salt and heavy spray. If that salt water gets sucked into the electronics, it's game over. You get a massive short circuit, leading to an electrical fire in the middle of a hurricane. That's an immediate death sentence. So, the automated safety doors slam shut to lock the salt water out. But this creates a lethal paradox. By closing its throat to avoid drowning in salt, the ship effectively traps its own heat. Inside the windowless compartments, the advanced computers and radar servers continue to generate massive energy. With the ventilation cut off, temperatures skyrocket. It is the mechanical equivalent of forcing an Olympic sprinter to hold their breath in the middle of a marathon. The automated computer governing the power grid registers the sudden thermal spike. Its core programming is to protect the ship's infrastructure at all costs. It doesn't know it's fighting a storm. It only knows the systems are melting from the inside. It has no choice. To prevent a catastrophic electrical meltdown, a programmed safeguard kicks in. The computer deliberately starves the main turbines of steam, forcing an emergency power reduction. The ship is effectively being neutered by its own safety protocols. Deep on the bridge, the captain watches the monitors. He needs 100% power to claw this 100,000-ton mountain of steel up the face of a rogue wave. But the computer has other ideas. It senses the heat, and it throttles the engines down. Right at the exact millisecond, the captain needs all 260,000 horsepower to plow through a 50-foot wall of water. The ship's brain is actively holding it back. It chooses partial suffocation over drowning. The crew is forced to fight the most violent ocean on Earth, with a propulsion system that is actively sabotaging itself. The captain's hands hover over the override switch. He freezes. Does he trust the algorithm built to save the ship, or his own gut that knows it's going to kill them? This is the ultimate nightmare of a modern commander, when the machine decides it knows better than the man. And while the engineers fight the computer in the dark, the deck crew faces the terrifying consequence of that speed drop. Gravity. When the ship loses its momentum and hits a violent 20-degree roll in a 50-foot sea, the lethal capability of the carrier turns directly against itself. On the flight deck and inside the hangar bays, squadrons of F/A-18 Super Hornets and F-35 stealth fighters sit parked. In calm waters, these are deadly weapons. In a typhoon, they are 30-ton unexploded bombs. Standard Navy rules call for 6 to 9 steel chains per aircraft. But in a typhoon, heavy weather tie-down is the only reality. Every single aircraft is shackled to the steel deck, using a minimum of 20 heavy-duty chains. The landing gear is compressed to the absolute limit, forcing the entire weight of the jet into the steel. This is not a parking regulation. This is the geometry of containment. When the carrier violently pitches down a massive wave, you feel it. A sudden, brutal sideways shove, exactly like sitting on a city bus that slams on the brakes, throwing everyone off balance. The ship isn't just moving forward, it's being tossed like a toy, and everything inside wants to fly. If a single metal link fails under the stress, the chain reaction begins and everything goes to hell. And then there's the assault on your senses. For 48 continuous hours, walking is impossible. You are crawling on the rough sandpaper deck, clinging to handrails as the ship tilts 20 degrees. Your stomach is churning, not just from the motion, but from the horrific soundscape. 100,000 tons of steel groaning and shrieking under the stress, while the wind screams through the vents like a banshee. Sleep is just a memory. Fatigue here isn't just tiredness. It is a structural risk to the entire vessel. These survival protocols weren't written by executives in a boardroom, they were written in blood. December 18, 1944, the Philippine Sea. Admiral William Bull Halsey, commander of the U.S. Third Fleet, made a fatal calculation error. Relying on bad weather data and the absolute belief that American steel was invincible, he ordered his fleet to sail directly into the path of Typhoon Cobra, a Category 4 storm. Winds blowing over 100 knots, wave crests towering at 70 feet. In an instant, the fleet stopped fighting the Japanese Empire. They were caught inside a pressure cooker turned up to the absolute maximum. The storm was the fire, and the ships were just a collection of trapped toys, waiting for the safety valve to fail. And it did. Halsey's destroyers, running dangerously low on fuel, sat too high in the water. When those 70-foot rogue waves struck, the brutal physics of the ocean took over. 3 destroyers, the Hull, the Monaghan, and the Spence, rolled past the point of no return. They didn't just capsize, they were completely erased. On the decks, 146 aircraft snapped their tie-down chains. They turned into giant wrecking balls, smashing through the fleet before being hurled into the Pacific. Think about that. That is not just a lost squadron. That is the total active air force of a mid-sized nation, obliterated in a single afternoon. 790 American sailors drowned in the churning dark. The U.S. Navy lost more men and ships to Typhoon Cobra in a few hours than in several massive sea battles combined. Mother Nature is the only auditor that ignores military rank, trillion-dollar budgets, or nuclear weapons. History is a brutal teacher, yet humanity, whether in 1944 or today, still needs the storm to remind us of humility. It proved that a fleet's ultimate strength is not the ability to blindly punch through a wall of water, but the precision to calculate a new path. Today, when great power competition forces a 100,000-ton modern carrier to hold its position and face a Category 5 hurricane, the survival rules change. The captain cannot run. He has to manipulate the physics. It leaves him with only one tactical option left: the resonance maneuver. Back on the bridge of the modern carrier, the bloody lessons of 1944 flash through the commander's mind. He reaches for the intercom, his voice cutting through the panic straight down to the reactor control room. "Reactor officer, engage the battle override, now." Deep below the waterline, the nuclear engineers execute the high-stakes protocol. They turn the physical keys, bypassing the computer's automated safety network. The digital safety net is officially dead. The human crew has just taken raw, unshielded control of the war against physics. The carrier is trapped inside the kill box of a Category 5 hurricane. There is no steering away, and there is absolutely zero room for error. If the ship drifts parallel to the waves, a 50-foot rogue wave will catch the broadside. The hull rolls past the point of no return. And just like that, it's over. The captain does what every human survival instinct screams against. He drives the bow straight into the teeth of the violence. This isn't brute force, it's math. The captain points the bow at a precise angle, 30 to 45 degrees off the waves. He isn't looking at the digital screens anymore, he's listening. He's listening to the deep groan of the steel walls, the violent shudder of the rudders, and the way the ship hangs for a split second too long at the peak of a massive swell. He isn't driving a 100,000-ton steel beast anymore. He is conducting a heartbeat. He is the only thing standing between his 5,000 sailors and the churning dark of the Pacific. Hit the wave flat on, and the entire structure takes the full force of the blow. Slice it at an angle, and the hardened steel of the bow splits the energy. But the angle is only half the equation. The real knife edge is speed. Order too much power? The bow drives deep underwater, and thousands of tons of crushing green water slam down on the flight deck, smashing aircraft and folding radar domes like tin foil. Order too little power? The rudders starve. You lose steering, the ship falls sideways, and the ocean capsizes you instantly. The captain has to hold a razor-thin line called bare steerage. It's the absolute minimum velocity required to keep the rudders biting into the water, not a single knot more. Why? Because he's fighting the deadly rhythm of the ocean. Every ship has a natural rhythm. Every storm has a wave period, the timing between the swells. If you drive the ship at a speed that connects these two, you are just pushing a swing. The rocking amplifies. The bow lifts higher, the drop gets deeper, until the ship is violently pitching out of control, slamming backward into the sea. The captain's job isn't to fight the waves, it's to break their rhythm. He forces the ship out of sync with the ocean. He accepts an agonizing, bone-jarring ride to ensure the physics never align against the hull. You don't outrun a Category 5 hurricane, you outmath it. The barometer climbs, the screaming winds, the horrific sound that has been your only reality for 48 hours, suddenly vanish. The USS Gerald R. Ford emerges, scarred but intact. The resonance equation was solved. The math held the ship together. But as the storm breaks, the true nightmare begins. They weren't looking through optical cameras, and they weren't listening to the noisy surface water. Deep below the chaotic storm, Chinese and Russian nuclear submarines were trailing the fleet, hiding in the silent, deep trenches. They deployed their deep-diving towed-array sonars, listening to the structural low-frequency vibrations that cut right through the storm's noise. High above the clouds, advanced synthetic aperture radar satellites scanned the flight deck every millisecond. Together, they mapped the exact breaking points of the American flagship. They recorded the deceleration. They documented the precise maneuver the U.S. Navy used to survive. The Navy passed the audit of Mother Nature. But in the unforgiving theater of great power war, a storm is never just a weather event. It is a geostrategic signal. It makes you wonder, if nature is merely the first test, what can those observing from the sidelines learn for themselves?